Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, June 11th, 2025, and this, I have to report as we start, is a very special day for me because my oldest daughter turns 21 today. Happy birthday, Shayna, who will not be listening to this podcast as she is preparing to begin her camp counseloring job in the Northwest woods of Wisconsin, but it's a pretty staggering event in a person's life to have their oldest attain her majority because, as far as I'm concerned, she's really 3 months old. And people have been sending me pictures of her all morning of when she was 3 months old, 4 months old, 5 months old. It's very striking. She's a wonderful kid and a very smart and able and serious person, and I'm very proud of her. And it's strange on the one hand to be, I'm 64 years old, so maybe this should have happened for me a long time ago. It will happen for both Seth and Matt at much younger an age than I am. I mean, I could be a grandfather right now, I suppose, or even a great-grandfather under other circumstances. But I started having kids late, and it is a miracle of life to see your children grow into adulthood with that weird bifurcated image in your head of, on their birthdays, particularly of the day they were born, you know, the third birthday party, the bat mitzvah, the high school graduation, this kind of living through time on the same morning. It's awe-inspiring, and it reminds you of the wonders of being alive and the miracle that it is to be alive and to get to a moment like this. So, with that sentimental,
I'm hearing Perry Como, Sunrise, Sunset. You know, is this the little girl I once knew?
Yeah,
playing in the background.
Perry Como. Perry, that's an interesting reference. That's Fiddler on the Roof. Perry Como was a lazy Italian crooner.
This is like Seth. This is like you have a wire cross somewhere. This is like when you were talking about the Catskills and you said the Poconos.
Yeah, like, I'm sorry, Perry Como is not the voice that I associate with Sunrise Sunset.
The whole song is about
Yeah, it is about that. No, that's a marriage song. Anyway, whatever. Thank you very much. And when your oldest turns 21, Matt, when your oldest turns 21, you will be much younger and much less affected by the idea that time is.
I won't be much younger. I'll be 7 years younger than you are today.
Okay,
so,
fair enough.
You know,
okay,
this is life.
Anyway, so that's my story, and joining me to tell more stories of actual horrors on this planet in the last 24 hours, our executive editor, Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
The aforementioned senior editor, Seth Mandel, and with the president of the Perry Como fan club. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And the increasingly aging Washington commentary columnist, Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Every day. Hi, John.
All right, look, I texted you guys last night and I said, I don't want to talk about LA. We've spent days talking about LA. Let's talk about something else, and we have to talk about LA. I'm sorry, we have to talk about LA because these two things happened yesterday that are so in conflict with each other that it's hard to sort of see past what's going on. So Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, gave a nationwide address, which I thought was interestingly staged because he's in front of the flag of California. Now, I have not really taken account of the fact, though I've seen the flag, that, you know, the flag of California features a bear climbing up a mountain is on the flag of California. And so as Newsom is speaking, it kind of looks like the bear is climbing up his shoulder and is about to take a chomp out of his left ear. So it was kind of distracting, like bad elementary Michael Deaver or one of those, you know, sort of like image geniuses would have said, I don't think we should put the flag there because you're just going to stare at the bear the whole time. But he gave this speech about basically how the moment of horror for our democracy has come. Trump is now activated. Essentially the shock troops of his authoritarian revolution. They're arresting seamstresses a word I don't think I've heard in my lifetime spoken by a public official, the word seamstress. Like, what are we? Is this the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire of 1911? Seamstresses? I didn't even know you were allowed to use gendered language like seamstresses. But they're arresting seamstresses. They're arresting.
There's a French laundry joke in there somewhere.
Somewhere,
I just
right?
Can't quite
I
connect
know.
it.
The seamstress is repairing the tablecloth that was served to him at the French laundry, and so this is what's happening. And Trump has come in with his essentially shock troops to undermine our democracy and destroy things. Apparently, because he didn't ask Newsom for permission to nationalize the National Guard or something like that. Whatever, fine. So he's saying Trump, 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 Trump. And meanwhile, the mayor of Los Angeles, who had said look, there's nothing to see here, does a citywide curfew. Says anyone on the streets after 8 p.m. or something like that is going to be arrested.
Very authoritarian of her. Very authoritarian.
This is my point. Get your stories straight. Is this just an expression of protest against the overreach of ICE, or is it a lawless spree that has to be snuffed out in its crib by things like curfews, which are kind of a radical thing to do in a large city? Like, I know we went through COVID where basically the entire country was under 24-hour a day curfew.
California in particular, which is why I think Newsom and Bass have no standing here. I mean, this is the same governor, as we just alluded to, who shut down his entire state, enforced draconian social distancing measures. LA County had a ridiculous mask mandate that we talked about it during the pandemic. And yet he was sneaking off to have very exclusive dinners at this shishi restaurant, the French Laundry. Now he wants to turn around and say that by trying to enforce the rule of law, Donald Trump is threatening our democracy. It's ridiculous. I mean, you mentioned that you don't like talking about Los Angeles. I love talking about what's happening in Los Angeles.
Okay.
I love it because it is putting into high relief everything going on in American politics right now. The Democrats have learned absolutely nothing from 2024. Absolutely nothing. Here we are, not 6 months into President Trump's second term, and you have Gavin Newsom lionized by the media for defending illegal immigration, violent protesters, right? And casting himself as the leader of the resistance to protect, quote unquote, our democracy. All three issues were terrible for the Democrats in 2024. And here they are again, just walking in to the meat grinder.
Okay, not just terrible in 2024. Remember, they were terrible in the year that the Democrats won in 2020.
They've been terrible forever.
When are we going to hear about the closed door meeting of the House Democratic Caucus or House whatever, or Democrats somewhere, as was the case after the 2020 election, which, remember, Biden won, right, by 7 million votes, and Abigail Spanberger met her colleagues at the House retreat and said, you guys nearly sank us with this defund the police stuff. Stop it. Did you see what happened in South Florida with the 3 Republicans winning in Democratic districts? What are you doing to us? And that was in a year that they won. This is coming after a year in which they not only lost, but in which Republicans held the House and took back the Senate. So they are in a worse position than they were in 2020. And they're like walking off a plank.
The media is saying today, as we record this podcast on June 11th, that Gavin Newsom is now the leader of the opposition. Well, is that a good thing? I mean, Gavin Newsom has a middling at best job approval rating in California after presiding over economic dysfunction, outward migration, homelessness in Los Angeles and San Francisco, crime in both cities, the wildfires that devastated Los Angeles, and now this episode in Los Angeles as well. And he's supposed to be somehow the Democrats' savior. By the way, he went on that one podcast to suggest that maybe biological men shouldn't be playing in women's sports. And then just last week he turned around and was
podcast was that Tucker or
Bannon? It was his podcast, I think.
Yeah, but
he was talking to Charlie Kirk, wasn't he?
Charlie Kirk. That's right. I'm sorry.
But
With
it was
Charlie
on his
Kirk.
podcast. Yeah, he did. But he said it once,
sorry,
and then he
right.
turned around last week and is defending the trans athletes besting biological females. And I don't see how this is a winner at all.
Well, there's something very similar to the defund the police stuff, which is that the Democratic Party as a party isn't making decisions on who's going to be its next leader. Like, this is Gavin Newsom deciding to be Gavin Newsom. And I was thinking, when you're talking about Abigail Spanberger, the other person that came to mind was Alyssa Slotkin, because the prior cycle, she had been one of the most outspoken Democrats against the defund the police stuff and what was going on in Portland and the autonomous zones and all that stuff. And she had sort of gotten into it with the AOC crowd about the fact that they were making decisions to elevate an issue that was killing every Democrat in between the coast. Slotkin, remember, barely scraped by this year to win the Senate seat.
In
that
Michigan,
was open.
right.
In Michigan, yes. Right. So she had to scratch and claw and fight her way into that Senate seat in Michigan just for the Democrats to hold that Senate seat. I expect her and other Democrats like her to be absolutely furious about this, but not directing it against the one coast, but the other coast. I think Gavin Newsom has put himself a bit in the crosshairs. It's not public yet, but it eventually became public with Biden. It eventually became public with AOC and the defund the police stuff. This stuff will spill out, and Newsom will have a target on his back.
I disagree.
Democrats.
Okay, well, here's my disagreement.
Okay.
So 3 Democrats have now surfaced in the first half of 2025 as potential national figures in the upcoming resistance. One of them was Cory Booker with his 25-hour filibuster that I still don't know. I don't know what the subject of the filibuster was.
He was angry. He was
angry. Usually you filibuster in order to stop a piece of legislation or he just stood there for 25 hours and talked,
emoted,
and raised a lot of money, and people are like, he was great, and I still don't know what he was saying or what point he was trying to make. And then there's Newsom, right, who at least now, so Booker is a senator from, I don't know, the 6th largest state in the country, population-wise. So he's not an unserious figure. He's not coming out of Idaho or something like that.
He is an unserious figure, though.
But I know, but you know what I'm saying. He's a political
ran for president, player. Major American political figure.
For president, right? Has an interesting backstory. Was a mayor. Okay.
Played college ball. Runs a good 40.
Yeah. Then there's Newsom, who is the governor of the largest state in the country by a pretty large factor, almost a factor of 2. And so he's, of course, an important American politician, just by dint of that fact. And then you have number 3. And who is number 3? He is a state assemblyman from New York named Zoran Mamdani, who is the flavor of the moment in progressive circles, has raised, it appears, close to $20 million for his mayoral campaign, which he will likely lose when the primary is up in 2 weeks.
Knock on wood.
Well, I mean, it's a complicated system, and it's actually hard for him. Interestingly enough, this process of ranked choice voting means that his capacity to sort of have momentum is somewhat thwarted by the fact that, you know, he can't lap Andrew Cuomo on the first ballot. That doesn't matter. It's like, but what does this tell us? So you have the governor of California who is coming out as an antagonist to law enforcement, because that's what ICE is. And to some extent, that's what the American military is, at least in the eyes of the public. We can talk about whether or not it is good or bad to activate Marines to do things. I tend to think it's bad, and Trump, they shouldn't have done it, and I don't like seeing it. But it's not unprecedented, and it is a real thing. And the cops and the military share. They are uniformed officers in the United States, the only people aside from like firemen who wear uniforms, and they are there putting their lives, and their job is domestically or abroad to put their lives on the line to protect other Americans. And Newsom is now an opponent of theirs, effectively. And I would say the LAPD, because the chief of the LAPD is like, we're outnumbered here. We're outgunned. This is dangerous. Put a curfew on. And then there's Mamdani, who is for government nationalization of opening government grocery stores, imposing a rent freeze that he does not have the power to impose as a mayor, and opposition to the Jewish national homeland. These are the three figures who have emerged in 2025 as the vanguard of the Democratic Party going into 2028. Dear God.
Yeah.
I
mean, you didn't mention AOC and Bernie Sanders,
right,
who were getting the huge crowds at the beginning of the year.
Right. But I'm saying Mamdani has kind of lapped them in that category just because he's fresh.
Well, he's fresh and he's young and he's running for, a prominent office.
He's very articulate and he's, all that.
He's a terrible person, and he's an anti-Semite, and shame on him and anyone who votes for him, by the way. But the very fact that he's doing so well, as you suggest, is an indictment of the Democratic Party.
Right.
And I think points to the loss of status among the Alyssa Slotkins of the world and the Abigail Spambergers of the world. We have a primary just yesterday in New Jersey where the two parties selected their gubernatorial candidates. Mickey Sherrill, who was part of that kind of national security group of Democrats elected in 2018.
Pilot,
right? She won the Democratic primary by about 14 points. But Jack Ciattarelli, who came within a whisker of winning the governor's seat in 2021, he won the Republican nomination overwhelmingly. New Jersey was a close state. It was close. It was closer than some red states, right?
Yeah, six
points in 2024
for Trump. Yeah,
I think this is a competitive election.
Trump,
I really do. I think Virginia may be out of play for the Republicans this year for a variety of
Republicans
reasons.
have won occasionally New Jersey, but the thing with Cheryl is that isn't she the Slotkinite candidate?
My point is, if the national atmosphere is the way we're headed, with Donald Trump's approval rating rising, right? His approval rating on immigration higher than it's ever been, according to Harry Enton of CNN. And the Democrats standing back there and defending law-breaking, threatening that the protests will end when ICE ceases to perform its job of removing illegal immigrants from the country, much less all the cultural stuff that the Democrats continue to defend. And then a figure like Mamdani, AOC, just stamping the Democratic Party with anti-Semitism and all it involves. I think it works hugely against the Democratic Party. I just want to say a couple other things.
Yeah, but I just want to add, just to respond to that, Cheryl will therefore be an extraordinary test case.
Yes.
In November, because she is in this state that's going a little purple, right? 6-point victory for Harris over Trump. Trump lost by 16 in 2020, lost by 6 in 2024, and as you say, Ciattarelli got within 3 points in 2021, just a year after Biden's election, over disgust with COVID restrictions and things that the governor who was elected, okay. So is she going from now until November to try to establish herself as a Sister Souljah style cat? Is she going to stand against this and say, I'm for law enforcement, as our friend Noah Rothman, our resident of New Jersey, says? What if she starts talking about cutting property taxes, which is what Chitterelli is going to talk about from now until November? Property taxes are too high in New Jersey. We need to cut property taxes. She's trying to run against him by saying he's a Trump, he's
she's
a
just
Trump
running
puppet.
against Trump. She
Right.
the only Democrat
So far.
only Democrat to say that what happened in Los Angeles is too much.
Gee, who is that, Matt?
It's my favorite Democrat on the planet, John Fetterman. He's the only one.
Yeah.
But, and so I don't see the mainstream Democrats, so to speak, having a Sister Souljah moment, because they are as captured by what's happening at the base of the Democratic Party and the various institutional prerogatives driving the Democrats to the left as anybody. But I do have two comments about the intellectuals in the media. The first is the whole framing of this story in the mainstream media is Trump wants this. Trump wants this showdown. Trump really wants this showdown. Well, you know who else wants it? Gavin Newsom. Okay, sending out a fundraising email to huge Democratic lists to say that, by the way, I'm going to give this speech proclaiming myself as the leader of the resistance and saying that Trump is going to create a military dictatorship if we don't somehow reject federal authority in California yesterday. It's not one side wants this. And it's unclear that Trump really wanted this at all. When he was at Fort Bragg yesterday, he was asked about why he took over the California National Guard and why he sent in the Marines. And he made reference to 2020, as we've spoken about on the podcast. And he said, I waited 7 days for Dum Dum there in Minnesota to do it during the George Floyd riots. And what happened? Minneapolis burned to the ground. So this time I didn't wait. I sent them in now. And guess what? Los Angeles was quiet, pretty quiet last night. Combination of having the troops and also Karen Bass's finally imposing the curfew, something which she might not have done had we not had this 4 days of argument over federal authority.
Abe,
I just want to make a comment here about the Democrats generally. And I think what's going on is Trump keeps them good and crazy, because when he is in office, they cannot help but focus on opposing him. It's not about them. It's all about him. And all he has to do is say, we're going to enforce the law. And they tack in the other direction and say, oh, no, we're gonna defend flouting the law and breaking the law. And the other thing is, if they come around at all to some sort of sensible position, Trump, because he doesn't care about his own party, will embrace them anyway, which is no good for them. So he sort of has them locked in.
Abe, you have been writing since 2020 about this question of whether America, post George Floyd America, was in a kind of culturally revolutionary state, or whether there was whether the counter revolution that rose against all of the changes, the cultural changes, the rules, the corporations, the $90 billion that went in charitable contributions to anything tagged or labeled Black Lives Matter, all of that stuff, and then the counter revolt, which also then wrapped in COVID and stuff like that. So revolution, counter revolution. Trump comes in, wins, thus indicating that the counter revolution turned out to be stronger than the revolution, at least as a matter of the popular will, let's say. Where do you see this now? Because I don't know that the people aside from the Soros family are going to be opening their wallets for the war against law enforcement. I can see them saying he's mean to immigrants and this is terrible and Harvard needs to be saved and student visas need to be saved. But I don't know. A lot of that money is Angelino money. Are the people, who live in Beverly Hills behind their gates, are they really enjoying what's going on in downtown LA and elsewhere in LA County? Are they going to be opening their their
I'll put it to you
pocketbooks
this
for
way.
this?
If anyone is in favor of this stuff, it is rich liberals.
Fair enough. Okay.
They really are. They're the only ones. It's why every minority group is attacked right. It's why every economic strata has moved to the right. It's rich white liberals who are the only ones who believe in this stuff because it actually doesn't affect them.
You saw the video yesterday, right?
It's outside their gates.
Oh, let's talk about that video, right? So
Yeah.
that's in New York, I think that video, not in California, right? The young,
But the
bros,
point is
the leftist bros stopping this,
the laughing,
this
and
says,
a black woman
get,
says she has to get to work, and them laughing in her face. That's
said,
sort of.
I'm a working class person. I got to go to my job, and you're blocking. And they're like, you don't have to work today because they don't work.
Right. Must be nice.
It is. I mean, that's a kind of one of those weird crystallizing anecdote moments that seems to, synectically stand for the whole. But look, if we go back 20 years, in 2006, after George Bush proposed his version of a liberalized immigration law, and the Republican Party and talk radio and stuff like that went nuts. This was after Katrina, right? So after Katrina and when Iraq failed to settle. And it was on the right that immigration really caught. It had caught in California some in the 90s, but then he said, okay, we want to pass some partial amnesty thing. And everybody and the vanguard of the right went nuts and said, we're done with him, or he's crazy, or this is terrible. And I remember at the time saying things like, there's no evidence that this works electorally for Republicans, which was true at the time. Republicans who ran on immigration restriction from San Diego to the Texas border to elsewhere were not showing results from it as a winning issue electorally. It was not working for them. But it's 20 years later, and you know what's working for them? Immigration. And you know where it's working? And this is, of course, the killer point here, is it's working on the border. And in California and in Florida and in New York, all places with very substantial Latino populations. And why? Because legal immigrants have turned foursquare against illegal immigrants. That's one of those numbers in this landmark Harry Anton report from yesterday, the day before yesterday, a 40-point shift among immigrants about how they feel about enforcing laws against illegal immigration. 40% to the right. So once it didn't work, now it's working. I, as an immigration dove, have to look at the nature of the political landscape and say what I once thought, which is that this country welcomes him, wants it, and doesn't really note all that much of a distinction between legal and illegal immigration because it's a workforce and it's helping and blah, 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 is no longer just not operative anymore. And the public is screaming what it thinks. Trump has a 20-point advantage on this, in not him personally, but should you have harder, or do you support ICE or do you not support ICE, is 57-38 in 3 different polls. And I'm looking at it and saying, okay, this is a political reality you have to deal with. And the Democrats are ostriching, they're burying their head in the sand.
So I agree with all of that as an immigration hawk. And I also remembered my second point about the intellectuals. Last week, Francis Fukuyama resurfaced this very famous lecture by Leo Strauss delivered in 1930s Germany about German nihilism, and kind of Strauss's explanation about when all ideas of transcendent value are thrown out the window, then you're just left to basically assertions of will. And it's Strauss commenting or previewing the Nazi phenomenon. And Fukuyama, but very prominent political scientist, was saying that this lecture also applies to the rise of what's been called the, it used to be the alt-right, now some people call it the woke right, but it's the anti-Semitic right, which we're seeing online in particular and among young men in particular, and it's a very alarming trend and should be opposed. But, there's another form of nihilism too. And it's the form of nihilism of those two jerks stopping the working class woman in the street and saying she doesn't need to go to her job. It's the nihilism of these masked hooligans in Los Angeles, burning cars, looting shops and stores, throwing cinder blocks at cops, and basically causing mayhem. And it's the nihilism that's motivating the whether it's the chopped district in Seattle, or whether it was the street fighting in Portland, or whether it was this bizarre story that was undercovered about kind of the Antifa going after the so-called Cop City, a police training facility outside Atlanta, or whether it's Luigi Mangione, or whether it's the guy who attempted to murder the Shapiro family in their home, or whether it's the pro-Hamas person who gunned down 2 Jews outside a Jewish event in Washington, D.C. I don't know. It seems like left-wing nihilism is breaking out everywhere around this country. And it's been reported that what's happened in Los Angeles last weekend seems to be somewhat of a staging ground or preview of what the organized nihilistic left is planning for this coming Saturday, the No Kings protest. So if we're going to call out nihilism on the right, which we should, because it's dangerous, we also need to say that what's happening at the level of resistance is just as disturbing and potentially more revolutionary than what we see in the fever swamps online.
Well, and also because California is a large chunk of the Democrats' congressional contingent, just because of its size, right? And so, Nancy Pelosi was, not the floor leader anymore, but was for a very long time from out there. But it also just a lot of Democrats are from California. And so when you see this stuff come up in Congress. But the other thing I want to say is something about the funding. I agree.
By the way, just to make your point, 12 to 13% of the members of the House are from California. Right. California, I think, has 52
And how many
members?
Of those districts would vanish if we did not count illegal immigrants as part of the census for congressional apportionment?
I don't know the answer to that, but is it? I mean,
it's quite a few, I think.
Right. Okay. So,
so the thing about the funding is this, that I think I agree in principle that even though white liberals, Abe is 100% right, white liberals love this stuff. I agree in principle that they don't want to be seen funding the specific things you're seeing, the images that we're seeing of people throwing cinder blocks at cops. But I think what people need to remember about the progressive funding machine is it basically runs itself. It's autonomous. What happens is, there are these groups at the top that give out the money. And the money is given to organizations, which then give it to organizations, which then give it to organizations, right? It's filtered down all the way through to the point where what they've done is they've created a system so that you can't point at the major funder and say, look what you're funding. Look, I have the paper trail. The whole system is set up to try to avoid a paper trail of that. And I'm not sure they're still the money people can even make that choice if they even wanted to at this point. I think they've set up a system to get themselves out of trouble, and that system is self-reinforcing and will continue funding all these things.
By the way,
and then
yes, you're absolutely right, and that is like the classic Max Weber theory of bureaucracy as applied to this ocean of money that pours down through this NGO bureaucratic, hydra-headed, tree with 1,000 roots. But it can be interfered with. And that's part of the story of the universities, right? Is that people who do actually give money directly to Penn, to Harvard, to Columbia, to others are saying, I'm not giving you money anymore. And it turns out that the coffers, it's not like they're not, good, responsible stewards of their husband or of their money. Like they use that money and it goes out the door as fast as it comes in, and you cut the spigot off, and it's not like they have a rainy day fund. So
but what I'm saying is they would have to stop giving to the funnel at the top.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. That can happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen, and I think Abe is right that the overarching idea that what you need to do is stop Trump before he creates the Third Reich will still have the power over them that it has today. But I want to go back to Mikey Sherrill, and Mikey Sherrill may be in a tough race. And the classic thing you do in a tough race, if your party is further away from the center of gravity in your state or in your district or whatever, is to try to either seize an issue or two from the other guy and say, I believe that too, or to somehow file down the objectionable nature of your coalition to kind of like buffer it and make so it's not edgy and you can't get blamed for it. Right now, if New Jersey is purple, if there's all this disorder in the streets, if you have a American public that is supporting ICE 3-2 and all of that, and you're Mikey Sherrill in a close race and you want to win the governorship, you may have a choice to make by September, which is you're going to have to say something to reassure the voters of New Jersey that you are not going to stop ICE from going in and arresting illegal immigrants if that's what the people of New Jersey want in aggregate, because that's a statewide election. It's not a district that's 70% Democratic that you can just win in. And I don't know where that goes. That's why I say it's an interesting test case. Mac, you could be right that there is no alternate argument in the Democratic Party, which is, by the way, what nihilism causes, right? Nihilism is an anti-theory thing. It is everything is bad. This is the most interesting aspect of what's happened to progressivism. Progressivism is supposed to be the argument that you do things in order to clear the path for a better future, which is radiant and bright, as long as you get rid of the obstacles to it. And American progressivism and world progressivism offers no radiant future. It says there are these obstacles that we need to clear, but they tend to be things like rent controls at this moment. So rent things that don't cause rents to freeze. So we're going to cause rent to freeze. How is that going to help? So that's where you get things like these incredibly tentative experiments and saying, here's what we need to do to tell people that will make things better, like the abundance agenda. We have to say something that's positive about the future, right? Trump is saying, I want to go to Mars, and we're gonna export all this oil and blah, whatever, and everything's gonna be better, and we're gonna have so much winning, you're not even gonna know what winning is. And they're like, the world's gonna melt, and everything is terrible, and rich people take all the money, and we need to expropriate some of it just to give some of it back to you, but there's no way to change anything, and so protest is good. What kind of message is that to deliver to this country?
I find the abundance agenda stuff kind of funny because it's the intellectual attempt to try to get on the positive track here, right?
Right.
But when you say when you tell a bunch of liberals we're going to remove some regulations to build houses and stuff, not only is it not sexy, you have 9 billion liberal interest groups and organizations and legal teams that have built up over decades to keep and build on the regulations that the abundance people are talking about getting rid of. I mean, it would be a real internal battle.
Yeah, this abundance democratic movement or abundance progressivism reminds me a lot of reform conservatism back between 2008 and 2014, and I'm friends with the Reformicons and colleagues with them. But at the time, I wrote that what was striking is that not a single politician was identifying as a reform conservative or really, taking on that mantle and agenda and calling it his own. The only one who came close.
This is Tim Pawlenty erasure. I won't stand for it.
Yeah, well, I don't
one
think
governor
Pawlenty
who likes
in
hockey.
2012 and 2011.
Well, he was sort of the he was
a Sam's Club conservative.
He was the Sam's Club, the image of the Sam's Club.
But it's not like he was going around citing Yuval Levin and Ramesh Ponnuru. And maybe Rubio at that time, around 2014, ahead of his 2016 campaign, was touching on some of the themes, but it didn't happen. What happened was Trump. And then, kind of paradoxically, Trump ends up doing what reform conservatives wanted, which was a party that was more attuned to its working class base and also a little bit more open to government intervention, but doing it in a way that alienated all the reform conservatives.
Right.
I always think that the way, when I look at the abundance people right now, you have Ezra Klein. He has a very prominent platform. You have his co-writer, Derek Thompson, another prominent platform at The Atlantic. And then who else? Who else is there? Is there?
Well, Mikey Sherrill, by the way,
is she calling herself an abundance Democrat?
A little bit. Now it doesn't matter.
I look forward to it.
Okay, yeah. It's a little bit, but it is got that yada yada quality, which is as revealed in the really brilliant review we published by Michael Warnoff of the abundance of the book Abundance, which is, here's what we need to do. We need to make it possible for us to build things, and that will be good. And so you have to understand we're doing a lot of things that mean that we can't build things. So here's what we need to do. Yada, yada, yada. We stop that, and then we build things.
Right,
well,
it's an intellectual...
that means saying you got to get rid of this zoning regulation. You got to get rid of that ULURP. You got to get rid of this thing that allows you to stay the construction project. The construction project is prima facie allowed to go forward, not prima facie expected to jump over all these hurdles in order to get past at 60% of the size that you actually wanted to build it at, right? That is, but they will not articulate
you would have to fight,
how you do it.
You would have to fight labor unions and environmental groups,
right,
which are the major building blocks of the Democratic Party. So,
but also they've been saying this stuff for. I mean, Matt Iglesias and Josh Barrow have been saying these things for quite some time.
Josh Barrow is
right?
not a liberal, and Matt Iglesias, right? But
Josh Barrow is sitting up there interviewing Richie Torres, and it's a very interesting interview. But you can see that there's no audience for that on the left, right? Like I find a Josh Barrow, Richie Torres interview interesting.
Yeah, it's like we love Fetterman.
That's a good indication that nobody on the left finds that interesting at all.
Right. Okay. See, this is I only bring this up, even though it sounds like we're running far afield. We're not, because Newsom and all these people are embracing this nihilism that Matt.
Or they're defending it, or they're not, or they're just kind of like their heads are in the sand,
right? Or they're standing unknowingly on a platform,
because they're so focused on Trump. I think they're so focused by what Abe is saying, the son of Trump, that they don't recognize what's happening beneath the surface.
And the thing about Trump, and this is the key to understanding this, even if you really dislike him, is, and we talked about this, it's chaos, and there's been a lot of problems with it, and it's been sloppy and everything, but he came in and he said, there's all this stuff that's broken, and I'm going to try to fix it. The federal government is broken, I'm going to try to fix it. Our immigration system is broken, I'm going to try to fix it. Our treatment of Jews and our campuses are broken, I'm going to do what I can to fix them. And the Democrats are saying, don't fix anything. They're not even saying, you know what, you're right, but what you're doing to Harvard is horrible. Here's the way to fix Harvard. They're like, Harvard doesn't need fixing. Harvard's perfect. Yeah. We have no problems with Harvard. We have no problems with the current immigration system. We don't like ICE. We don't like enforcement. How dare you? That is not an answer.
Free Mahmoud Khalil.
Right. But that's not an answer you can't answer something with nothing. Now, you can, if the something craters and becomes a complete catastrophe, then not being associated with the something is a way you can like get your way through, which is Biden 2020, right? Like the COVID America was a disaster. Trump got blamed for it to some extent, and Biden sat there in the basement and just like stood there and benefited from the country saying, this is horrible. Like this is horrible. We've got to do something to change things. But it's not, you're not going to get a hand dealt to you like that again. It's just not going to happen, no matter how badly Trump bungles things. If they're going to say, no, the agency of the federal government that is supposed to enforce our immigration laws should not be allowed to enforce our immigration laws. That is not a rational answer. And
right.
you know
and,
that
and just to put a marker down, on the Mickey Sherrill stuff, just so we know, the state of New Jersey is essentially run politically more by the teachers union probably than anything else in the state at the moment because of the way property taxes are set up and all that stuff. The teachers unions have been putting out guidance in New Jersey about how to protect children in the schools from ICE raids. And so that's the sort of thing that even if Sherrill is able to avoid the LA riots and something that's happening far away, she's not going to be able to avoid, I don't think, this sort of inevitable clash that will happen in her own backyard, which is that her base is telling schools how to outwit ICE and how to protect illegal immigrants from ICE. And the other side of that are voters who understand that they are paying through the nose in property taxes, in part, not in whole, but in part because the schools have this policy of protecting everybody from the federal government, whatever. That's the sort of thing that I think she'll have to face eventually.
Right. So that's what I mean by the rubber meeting the road and Democrats having no answer when Trump says, yeah, I'm going to enforce immigration law. Now, Biden and Obama, when they were trying to fight against the turn in the public against them, would say, I am too enforcing immigration law. Look how many people we've deported. Record numbers of people deported under Biden, record numbers of people deported under Obama. They would say out of one side of their mouth while letting everybody in across the border, not with their mouth, but with their eyes closed, right? Because they knew that there was a liability. Now they have no responsibility for this because they're not running the federal government. And now they can say ICE is bad. And that, we know it's poison. Spamberger said in 2020, defund the police. Anti-ICE is just defund the police in another costume. There's no difference.
Point to another example. There was a resolution in the House of Representatives condemning the incendiary attack in Boulder, Colorado, where an illegal immigrant torched Jewish Americans. Democrats, I think 20 Democrats voted against it.
So there were two resolutions. One just said, we condemn the attack in Colorado. And then there was a second resolution that said, we condemn the attack in Colorado by an illegal immigrant, and we need to do something about our immigration laws to make sure this doesn't happen again. And that second one was voted against by, including my congressman, Jerry Nadler of the Upper West Side of Manhattan, the Upper West Side of Manhattan is 20% Jewish, and Nadler is Jewish. And he is voting against a resolution condemning
illegal immigration
from Kuwait and Egypt.
And it's connection to anti-Semitic violence.
Yeah, right.
What's going on? Honestly, when you look at this and you're like, what is going on?
Yeah. But then you have to think, and then we should move on to Tulsi Gabbard, but then you have to think that what's going on here is matter of real conviction. That is, I'm saying, look, they should be looking at the poll numbers. They should be looking at this. They should be looking at that. I think when you tell me this about the teachers unions in New Jersey, Seth, I'm like, Why are they bothering with that? Don't they just want to like get more money and tenure and stuff like that? Why is
they wouldn't
helping
have students? They would have no students without migration,
Okay, you know
legal
what?
or illegal.
Okay, fair. Okay, but okay, so that's one answer to that question. But how about the fact that what they are saying when they say abolish ICE, what they're saying when they say you don't have the right to enforce immigration laws and laws in this country, because according to leftist doctrine, you really only are supposed to it's fine to like oppose laws and interdict yourself between laws you think are unjust, right? That's part of the doctrine of civil resistance from the 50s onward. So they believe it. That the problem here isn't that Democrats are doing this willfully and they're screwing themselves up at the polls, maybe, and they're hoping that Trump will screw up and save them. It's that this is what they believe, and if this is what they believe, and they're willing to kind of risk alienating the American public because of deep conviction, then there's something a little honorable about that, and B, Republicans are going to dominate the politics of this country for an entire generation until these people die out.
I don't think it's honorable, because I think there is a contingent that believes, but the Democrats that we're hearing from, that's not them. They're the ones who are scared of the contingent that believes,
right? Okay.
And so they're not changing.
Right.
They're not turning around because they're scared of the people on their own side.
A liberal will never take his own side in an argument.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that you have to distinguish between the nihilistic left that I was just discussing and then just the liberal politicians who, as Abe says, are just, okay, we'll go with that then. Trump is worse.
Right. And this, of course, is a sign, yet again, of the catastrophe that was visited upon this country by the decline in the authority of the political parties, right? Of the central Democratic and national central and Republican parties, which had a moderating effect on, generally speaking, on the, cutting off the extremes and making 40-yard lines in which politicians were supposed to maneuver, because otherwise they couldn't get money, they couldn't get endorsements, they couldn't, they would be opposed by the official party, and it would be very difficult for them to cut through as insurgents or something like that. The complete destruction of the centrality of the parties has, of course, empowered exactly those people against the liberals who can't take their own side and therefore have no power to make an alternate argument, because they're so easily, just like Republicans, so easily knocked off by their lefts. Okay, so let's now talk about the right, or the left right, or whatever, and this astounding video released by Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard yesterday, kind of out of nowhere, about the evils of the United States.
She had visited Hiroshima after, I believe, the Shangri-La conference in Singapore, which she had attended as part of the U.S. delegation. And her visit there, I believe, was the peg for this 3-minute long, slickly produced video over her social media account, decrying the use of atomic weaponry in the Second World War, and basically using the same rhetoric that the nuclear freeze movement used in the 1980s, that kind of Soviet fellow travelers used throughout the Cold War, that nuclear war is both imminent and apocalyptic, and we should do everything to avoid that outcome. And I think the first reaction is to kind of raise an eyebrow. Why this video? Why now? What is she trying to say? It sounds almost exactly like what comes from the Kremlin whenever America supports Ukraine or takes another step to support Ukraine. There's also the way to read her argument that would suggest that America and Israel need to take dramatic steps to stop Iran's nuclear program, thereby limiting the risk of future nuclear war by the Ayatollahs. Yet we know that Tulsi Gabbard is among the leading voices inside the administration arguing for a deal with Iran that would allow Iran to continue nuclear enrichment against the wishes and public statements of the President of the United States. So this video was a very revealing glimpse into what is happening behind the scenes in this White House on issues of national security. And I have to say, as someone who believes in peace through strength and Trump's first-term foreign policy and American might in the world, I was alarmed.
I just want to add, just to put a point on it, that she closed the video by saying there are warmongers who are pushing two nuclear powers to the brink of war, maybe because they have fallout shelters of their own that they can get to, but they'll leave the rest of us, out in the nuclear winter. This was like nasty stuff.
It's a total misunderstanding of the prepper community. The preppers who have the nuclear fallout shelters, right, they are probably on her side on a lot of foreign policy questions.
Right. And you know who has a shelter? The cabinet. Tulsi Gabbard, the president's cabinet will be protected. But I want to say something about you mentioned the slippery...
Wait, I got to ask a question. I got to ask a question first. What countries do you think she was referring to? Because I kind of assumed that one of the two countries is Israel.
Yeah, I thought it was Iran and Israel. But
Iran isn't a nuclear power yet.
That's my point. Is that
so we are...
Yeah, but
Israel is,
or it's us and Russia, and it has to do with Ukraine.
Okay,
but we also know she doesn't want Israel to strike Iran. It's very confusing,
right? Yeah. So it's very confusing, but I think, therefore, as a Rorschach test, if you're the woke right, you maybe hear Israel when she says there are warmongering countries with nuclear weapons. Right. Yeah, because Israel's shelters are really incredibly efficient. You know what they are? Stairwells. When there is a raid on Israel, my sister has to go out of her apartment and stand in her stairwell in order to avoid flying glass if a bomb explodes somewhere near her. That's how sophisticated the fallout shelter system is in Israel. It's going to stand in your stairway where there's no glass, right? Who has... Where are the fallout shelters? What the hell is she talking about?
Well, Hamas has fallout shelters.
What did she watch?
Tunnels. If you re-up your membership to Hamas now, you will get access to the tunnels.
Did she watch like a Twilight Zone episode from 1962?
No, what was that ABC special in 1983? The day after.
Right. But that's the thing. Right. Here is what she watched. Here's what she watched. The footage is from a specific movie called Atomic Cover-Up. This is, or not all of the footage, but you know, some of the footage, and it's credited throughout her video. This is Greg Mitchell, the writer who, and documentary filmmaker who made this. Now, Mitchell spent much of his professional life seeking out these images. And the Atomic Cover-Up is about the idea that America, not so much the idea, but there were a lot of classified images and videos of the Hiroshima attacks that were filmed by the American government, by people in the army, things like that. And he spent his life trying to get at them and eventually sort of did by accident and then got them. And this is a fairly recent movie. It's only a few years old. And what it came up again. It got a second life after Oppenheimer came out, because this movie, Atomic Cover-Up, was sort of a rejoinder to the people who were, you had all those reviews who were saying that this was some sort of lionization of the people who make big bombs and things like that, right? We went, this is the answer to that. Okay, this is the anti-Oppenheimer sort of thing. And that tells you where this is coming from. This is coming from a sort of... Yeah. This is like the documentary film.
Yeah, but you're making an important point. But Greg Mitchell plays a different role here, because, as Abe would say, The point about the Tulsi Gabbard thing is that it is a far left-wing trope to blame the United States for World War II. We dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in order to forestall the necessity of a ground invasion
Millions
of Japan that would have taken hundreds of thousands of lives, and we saved American lives at the cost of Japanese lives. And you know who's happy about that? Me. You know who should be happy about that? Every single person in the United States. You know who else should be happy about that? Yeah, and you know who else should be happy? The Japanese, because their regime was the imperial Japanese regime was destroyed forever in the ashes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and a new country was built on that foundation that is prosperous, though it's obviously got a declining. It's the second or third largest economy in the world, and it is Pacific, and it is not out to destroy any other country on earth. And Greg Mitchell, just to bring this full circle, Greg Mitchell's great journalistic project was the idea that Upton Sinclair, the radical journalist and author of the novel The Jungle, who ran for governor in California in 1934, would have won and ushered in a new socialist future for the United States. He's written books about this and documentaries. Were it not for a cabal of rich Hollywood, moguls destroying him with their evil whispering campaign. So we're now having the Donald Trump's director of national intelligence evoke the work of Greg Mitchell, who wanted a socialist revolution led by Upton Sinclair in the United States and mourns its loss, speaking as part of the Trump administration. Meanwhile, at that very same moment that she releases the video, Trump is at Fort Bragg. And what does he do at Fort Bragg? He says, "You're the greatest. America's the greatest. We're going to fight to keep this world safe and free. Joe Biden is a wimp." Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
He says, we're the only allied country that doesn't celebrate the victory in World War II.
You're right.
Right.
Victory Day.
We need to start celebrating that.
Yeah. Yeah. So
it is a real problem for the administration.
Yeah.
Because remember, this is set against the debate over Iran, and that we're going to reach the 2-month limit after the start of the negotiations. There's another session of negotiations set for this weekend where the Iranians are supposed to present their counterproposal. We know that they're not going to agree to abandon enrichment. So it's decision time here. There's also the fight over Pete Hegseth, and reports that apparently Hegseth is having trouble filling some of his staff positions based on opposition from the White House, in particular J.D. Vance. And so I have the feeling that it's actually Trump protecting Pete Hegseth more than anybody else here. Because
that is a weird story, because Hegseth's appointment, if you follow the logic of what's being said and what we know about White House personnel, Hegseth is being denied people that he wants to appoint who are not Gabbardites.
Right.
Like he wants...
They're still realists.
They're realists. I'm sure they're, but they are not...
It's not like the Gabbard Carlson part of the
and the people
Trump
who have
movement.
the people who seem to have been imposed upon him are pretty radical.
It's the Koch. It's the Koch.
Right. Koch, right.
The Koch.
So,
the Koch view.
So we don't really understand what's going on here.
But my takeaway is actually it's Trump protecting him, and Hegseth using Trump as a shield, by the way, because Hegseth was there too. I mean, this speech was incredible. Trump gave. The troops were fired up. The images were just amazing. It was quite a patriotic, nationalistic celebration. And then at the same time, she's releasing this video over social media condemning the United States of America.
Right. And by the way, let's talk about the No Kings thing, right? Because there's going to be the No Kings demonstration. And meanwhile, there's going to be a military parade in Washington, D.C., and you're going to hear all these liberal pundits saying, this is it's like May Day. This is like Soviet Russia. We're having a military parade. How terrible is that?
Read your Rand Paul quote.
The Rand Paul. So Rand Paul, of course, is not a liberal, but is an isolationist. Rand Paul said, where is this? Hold on.
He said in the press conference
Never
yesterday.
been a big fan of goose-stepping soldiers in big tanks and missiles rolling down the street. This is how
American
Rand Paul
soldiers
describes
goose-stepping.
American soldiers, as though they are Nazis and Soviet shock troops on May Day. I mean, he's a shameful figure anyway, but I mean, this is maybe the worst thing I think he's ever said openly. Usually he says slippery, slimy things in the shadows that he can kind of take back or deny. Goose-stepping soldiers. First of all, American soldiers, as they march, do not goose-step. Just to make that clear, that is not the American martial marching form. So just as a matter of course, but what's going to happen here? They're going to have this No Kings demonstration, and the right is going to have a celebration of the American military, and all we hear is like, oh, we shouldn't have. This is kind of gross. I mean, so militaristic.
The
First
tanks
of all,
are
America's
heavy. The tanks are heavy for DC's streets.
Streets, right?
And by the way, there are a lot of potholes in DC streets already.
Yeah.
So let's fix those before you complain about
also,
my tanks.
We are so militaristic here in the United States that we are at the lowest level in the number of military personnel in America that we have been since before the Second World War. That's how militaristic we are.
But it's more than just the numbers. It's the mission. When he says goose stepping, and when Tulsi Gabbard says, we did all this terrible thing, and the American government has been lying to its people about how terrible it is. It's the mission, the people, and the things that won that civilizational war are also under attack from him.
That's, I think, the central point is that Tulsi Gabbard is attacking the United States for saving the world. And she should be stripped of her position, and she should go back to Hawaii and run a health food store along Maha principles.
Aloha.
We'll be back tomorrow. For Matt, Seth, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.